not in a palace, nor in a sacred chamber, but in a humble home near the wet breath of the Nile, where the reeds sway and the mud clings to everything like a silent, loving hand. Your mother gave birth with women singing nearby, midwives who knew herbs, gods, and the way a newborn first reaches for warmth. There was no screaming in that small room. Only the rhythmic sound of a clay pot dripping water onto a cool cloth, the low hum of prayer, and the soft exhale of a world that had seen this moment 1,000 times. Outside, the Nile moved like a slow heartbeat. In Egypt, the river wasn't just water, it was the beginning of time. It was fertility, chaos, and rebirth. And now, it would carry you too. You grew with the smell of mud and myrrh in your lungs. Your fingers touched flax before you knew what cloth was. Your skin baked under the same sun that once kissed the lips of pharaohs. In your village, laughter came easily. So did gossip. Bodies were not secrets. Children ran naked, their limbs browned by dust and divine indifference. Shame, in the modern sense, did not exist. Modesty was cultural, yes, but guilt was not sewn into your skin. From your first days, you watched the world with eyes wide open. You saw women bathe in the river, their heads covered modestly, their laughter echoing across the reeds. You saw men wrestle, not for sport, but for joy. Their strength not a threat, but a performance. You saw affection between your parents too. The way your father's hand sometimes lingered on your mother's back a little longer when she brought in water. The way they shared dates and secret smiles. You didn't yet understand what it meant, but it was there. The thrum of something ancient and soft, something the grown-ups didn't name aloud, but never denied. And you learned quickly. In Egypt, sex wasn't hidden, but it wasn't shouted either. It was simply there, like the Nile, like the heat, like the way the stars always returned. The elders spoke in half-phrases, in metaphors carved deep into the wood of everyday life. Don't offer honey to someone who has no teeth, one would say. Or, a thirsty one doesn't ask which pot the water came from. These weren't just proverbs. They were warnings, or blessings, or invitations. You began to notice as you aged how eyes met in the market, how a woman adjusted her sash when a certain man passed, how a boy smiled too long and a girl blushed, and no one scolded them, only watched and whispered and smiled. Your body started to change. At first, it felt like heat rising in your chest, a pulse that quickened at the smell of oil and sweat. You didn't know what to do with it. At night you dreamed of arms, mouths, shapes, but there was no shame, only confusion. You weren't broken, you were blooming. No one gave you a lecture, no one sat you down with scrolls. Instead, you learned the way the lotus opens, slowly, sensually, one petal at a time. Your older cousin whispered things under her breath when she braided your hair. She told you which herbs made someone more open, which necklaces brought glances. Which gods to pray to when the ache in your chest didn't leave. You prayed, not out of fear, but out of hunger. Because even as a youth, you understood. In this land, desire wasn't a punishment. It was a signal, a message from the gods that you were alive and ready to taste the world. The temple murals didn't hide this truth. You had seen them. Dancers painted with hips swaying like rivergrass. Lovers depicted not in shame, but in harmony, their limbs interwoven like vines. Sometimes their eyes closed, sometimes mouths touched, and always the gods watched. Not in judgment, but in amusement, perhaps even pride. In the night, you lay on a simple mat, listening to frogs sing along the Nile's edge. The wind carried the scent of date wine, sweat, and warm loaves. And in that darkness, you let your hand rest over your chest, where your heart beat so fast it felt like a drum. You were not alone in your silence. Across the village, others lay the same. Their thoughts soaked in the same longing. Desire wasn't something hidden. It was the same as hunger or thirst, an ache that called to be answered. And so, as you grew, you didn't ask if love and sex would find you. You asked how. Through ritual, through accident, through the smile of the potter's apprentice, or the steady hands of the boatmaker's daughter. Even in childhood, you could feel the stories building around you. You heard tales of sacred unions, pharaohs who claimed their bloodline was born from the coupling of gods. You heard of Isis and Osiris, their love so eternal it defied death. A myth soaked in sex and sorrow, in longing and rebirth. Osiris, dismembered by his jealous brother, had his body parts scattered across the world. Isis searched and wept, and when she found them all, save for one, she created his missing member with magic. She laid upon him, and from that union, Horus was born. You were told this story not in embarrassment, but in awe. In your world, sexuality was divine. So you waited, you listened, you watched the moon, and one day you felt the shift. In yourself, in your surroundings. A glance held longer than expected. A hand brushed yours by accident. Or was it? Evening came. The stars rose. You stepped out into the night, and you were not a child anymore. The Nile whispered to you, like it always did, and you began to understand its language. Its slow rhythm was your rhythm, its gentle curves your own, its silences your longing. And so your journey began, not with a grand act, but with an understanding that to be alive in Egypt was to be of the body, not separate from it. Your body was not a shameful shell. It was your offering to the world, a temple in motion, a secret no longer hidden. And now, as the night deepens, you can feel the stories sleeping inside your skin. You are ready. The rest of the tale is waiting. You wake early, before the sun stretches across the Nile's surface. The village is still hushed, blanketed in the slow breath of pre-dawn. And as you step outside, barefoot on cool, packed earth, you feel something ancient move within you. Not just the hunger for food or touch, but the deeper knowing that your body is part of something far older than yourself. In Egypt, your flesh is not just yours. It belongs in part to the Ma'at. You've heard the word since you could speak. It's not a god exactly, though she wears a feather in her hair and sometimes appears on tomb walls. Ma'at is an idea, a force, a rhythm. She is balance. She is truth. She is the order that keeps the sun rising, the Nile flooding, and the hearts of people beating in harmony. Sex, too, is part of that balance. It isn't a dirty thing, nor a joke. It isn't hidden away in shameful corners or whispered behind closed doors. Instead, It's like the cycle of seasons or the turning of the stars, essential, expected, sacred. Just as crops must be planted and harvested, so too must bodies touch, ache, and be restored. You remember the first time you heard it plainly, during a festival when the priestess stood in front of the gathered crowd and poured milk onto the earth. "This," she said, "is life entering life." No one laughed. No one squirmed. It was true. Sex in your world is part of the sacred design. It binds you to the gods, to the land, and to each other. It is not wild chaos. It is the divine architecture of longing. In the temples carved in stone, you've seen the scenes. A god stands behind a goddess, his hand on her waist. Their eyes closed, their postures soft, almost floating. This isn't an act of dominance or control. It is a reenactment of the first moment, the moment when everything began. In one myth, the world is born from the seed of Atum, the creator god, who brings life forth by pleasuring himself on the primeval mound. No lightning bolts, no grand explosions, just solitude, pleasure, and the release of potential into the universe. In another tale, Geb, the earth, and Nut, the sky, love each other so deeply they must be pried apart by force so that the world can exist between them. Even then, their longing remains, and you, the people of Egypt, are their echo. This isn't blasphemy. This is origin. The priests may speak in metaphors, but the meaning is clear. Creation comes from desire, not punishment. The universe was not born in shame. It was born in embrace. And so, your body is not separate from the sacred. It is the sacred. Even in your day-to-day life, you feel this truth. When you wash yourself in the river, it is not just cleanliness, it is ritual. When you braid scented oil into your hair, it is not just vanity, it is offering. When you run your fingers across the skin of someone you love, it is not just lust, it is remembering. There are no sermons telling you to repress this. There are boundaries, yes, cultural expectations, social contracts, but never the idea that your body is wrong. If anything, the body is seen as a marvel, a vessel worthy of ornament and rest. It is dressed in linen, anointed with perfume, adorned with jewelry not just for status, but for delight. You've seen women wearing lotus-shaped earrings and men with coal darkened eyes. You've smelled the aphrodisiac power of Kai-Fi incense wafting from doorways. Sensuality is everywhere, in color, in fabric, in movement. Even laborers sing with a certain rhythm. Even the pounding of grain can seem suggestive when the sun hits just right. The gods made you this way, soft, longing, and luminous. And yet, this isn't indulgence, it's alignment. The Ma'at teaches that everything has its season. Desire, too, must be in balance. Too much longing leads to chaos. Too much denial leads to illness. The goal is harmony, to follow your body without letting it control you. You're taught not to repress, but to understand. So when your heart stirs at the sight of someone, you do not feel guilt, you feel curiosity. What does this feeling ask of you? Is it real? Is it fleeting? Is it something sacred? Or is it just the passing of the sun across your chest? Even the old women speak of it, though in quieter tones. The gods gave us hips for carrying children and for being carried, one says, laughing. She's missing teeth, but not wisdom. The stories in the market are full of laughter and longing. You hear of a farmer's daughter who sent a love letter written in wine across a piece of cloth. Of a baker who refused to make bread unless a certain guard passed by her stall each morning. Of a merchant who built an extra room onto his house, not for storage, but for secrets. And in all these stories, the body is not the enemy. It is the letter, the offering, the doorway. There is even a practice, not spoken of often, but not hidden, of kissing the thigh. You overhear it once, and your face flushes. But the explanation is gentle. It's not what you think, an elder says. It's what you feel. You learn that the ancient texts sometimes speak in euphemism. Entering the garden might mean entering the bedroom. Opening the lotus may mean pleasure. But there's no ridicule in these phrases, only poetry. You begin to understand that metaphor is not used to obscure, but to elevate. To speak of sex is not crude in your land. It is art. Papyri found in tombs sometimes include love poems, raw, sweet, and bodily. A girl writes, "My beloved is on the other side of the river, but my desire crosses before him. I make a boat of my breasts, and the current carries him home." And somewhere, you feel those words resonate in your chest. You are not alone in your longing. Even in the afterlife, the Egyptians believe, the pleasures of the body continue. You will eat, drink, dance, and love. You will rest in fields of reeds with the one who touches your soul. And there too, Ma'at will smile. The body is not a cage. It is a compass. It points toward connection, balance, and the memory of divine heat. Now, as the sun crests the horizon and turns the Nile into a ribbon of molten gold, you return to your house. You pass a young couple exchanging figs with more intimacy than speech. You see a woman adjusting her sash while humming an old song, one you now understand. You lie down on a cool mat. You close your eyes. And in that brief moment before sleep, you realize your body, your hunger, your breath, they are all part of the design, not broken, not dirty, not accidental, but written in the stars, the same way the Nile is written into the land. Your voice has deepened, or your hips have begun to swell with quiet purpose. Either way, the village sees it. And you feel it, not only in your bones, but in the weight of every glance that lingers too long, every silence that follows a question no one wants to ask aloud. It begins gently, a new awareness in your step, a different rhythm when you walk through the market, the way your fingers linger just a moment longer on a fruit before choosing it. You are watched, not for judgment, but for recognition. Something has awakened in you. In the dust of midday, under canopies of linen that flap like sails above the market stalls, you start to notice the game. But it is not called that. No one names it. No one teaches it. It unfolds as naturally as the petals of a lotus beneath your fingertips. The glances come first. A boy whose eyes linger over your shoulder, then dart away too quickly. a girl with hands stained from making perfume, who brushes past you and leaves the scent of myrrh behind, lingering longer than the contact itself. There are codes you begin to learn, subtle as a whisper, as fleeting as a shadow across the wall of a courtyard, an ankle shown by accident, a piece of fruit offered too sweetly, a bracelet adjusted when a certain someone walks by. Not words, but signals. Signals everyone seems to know, yet no one teaches. And in this world, you discover something comforting. Attraction is not shameful. It is expected, part of growing, part of finding your place in the grand web of balance the gods have spun. But there are rules, not laws, not commandments, just rhythms, understandings. You don't stare too long. You don't speak first, unless you're certain your voice is welcome. You don't touch, unless the silence between you has changed. In your home, your mother begins to watch you more carefully. Not with suspicion, with a kind of wistfulness. She sees the curve in your curiosity, the restlessness in your hands. You've become quiet, she says one night, braiding your hair or setting out bread. You nod. Because how do you speak of this new longing? Not just for touch, but for recognition, for that heat that pools in your chest and has nowhere to go, for someone who sees you as you're beginning to see yourself. In temples, the statues of Hathor, goddess of love, music, and beauty, seem to smile differently now. You understand her gaze. You understand her sistrum, the instrument she holds that jingles like laughter and longing. You find yourself watching dancers differently, listening to love poems not as stories, but as possibilities. In one, a lover writes, "Your voice is the wine I drink. My knees grow weak at your footsteps. My body is the field, and you, the rain that blesses it." The words stir something deep. And it's not just love. It's desire. That pull in your belly. That ache in your palms. That flutter in your throat when someone you never noticed suddenly becomes the center of the room. In this land, desire is allowed. It is not unchecked, but it is not denied. Still, you begin to notice the barriers. Not from gods, from people. You are of a certain family, a certain trade. They are not. Or you are expected to marry someone chosen long ago, someone whose name you know, but whose scent means nothing to you. Even so, there are cracks, courtyards where hands graze by accident, markets where eyes do more speaking than mouths, quiet rooftop meetings at dusk, when the day cools, and the Nile reflects the first stars. There are stories of girls who dropped bracelets on purpose, of boys who lingered after water fetching, just for one more glance. Of veils lifted briefly, revealing not just a face, but intent. You learn discretion. Desire must flow like the Nile, visible, powerful, but always within its banks. A scandal can mean exile. A touch too soon can bring shame. Not from heaven, from the neighborhood. And yet, no one scorns desire itself. They scorn the imbalance, the impatience, the breaking of trust. You hear of a weaver's daughter who eloped with a sailor. Her mother wept, but not because she left. Because she left too soon, before the gods and the family had time to bless the path. Timing is everything. Your own path begins to form. You think of someone now, perhaps more than one, a figure in the morning fog, a laugh you crave hearing again, the color of someone's wrap, the way it clung to their waist. You've never spoken your desire, but it speaks through you, in how your hands linger on certain fabrics, how your voice softens when asking for bread. How you dream, not of faces, but of shadows curling into yours. One evening, you walk along the river. You see a couple, young, maybe only a little older than you. They sit close, not touching, but the silence between them glows. You don't disturb them. You pass by with soft steps, letting their moment remain whole. And you think, one day, maybe I'll sit like that too. You return home and lie on your mat, staring at the ceiling beams. The night air is thick with jasmine and possibility. Somewhere, a song is being sung, low and slow, full of longing. You wonder if that singer knows who they're singing to. You wonder if the person meant to hear it is listening. You fall asleep, thinking not of grand ceremonies or temple rituals, but of stolen glances, brushed fingers, the warmth of fruit shared under shade. Because here, in your Egypt, the first acts of love are rarely loud. They begin in silence, but they echo forever. In the hush of morning, when the market still smells of ashes and yesterday's bread, you notice it again, the presence that's always been there, but now feels heavier, watching, listening, waiting to be remembered. The gods, not the distant deities of thunder or vengeance. No, the ones close enough to feel the warmth of your skin. Gods who see the sweat behind your knees, the quickening of your pulse, the way your hand hovers when you pass someone fragrant. You've grown up with them, in carvings, in songs, in the shapes of your own hands. And yet only now do you begin to understand. These gods have bodies, and they understand yours. Egyptian gods are not ghosts. They breathe, they sweat, they bleed, love, rage, ache. Some even cry. And when it comes to desire, they are not merely observers. They are participants, teachers, reminders that what you feel is not shameful. It is divine. You remember Hathor first. The goddess of love, beauty, music, fertility. Her temples are perfumed, alive with laughter and wine. Priests and priestesses wear anklets that chime softly as they move, a rhythm that mimics heartbeats, footsteps, moans. She is often shown with a sistrum in her hand, shaking it like a pulse. She is no passive figure. She chooses, she dances, she drinks the red beer meant to calm her, but not to tame her. You understand now that Hathor is not about submission. She is about fullness. Pleasure taken, pleasure given. Then there is Bez, short, bearded, lion-faced, a god with a belly and a grin, guardian of childbirth and sexuality. His image is carved on bedposts and amulets, not to scold, but to protect. He scares away bad spirits, yes. But more than that, he blesses the bed. Not just the act of creating children, but the act of joy, of intimacy, of laughter during sex, of the wig slipping off and the oil getting everywhere. He is the reminder that even pleasure can be sacred, as long as it's shared. You wear his image sometimes, carved into bone or painted on linen, not as decoration, as invitation, for safety, for luck, for alignment with forces deeper than words. And then there are the stories. Ah, the stories. Isis and Osiris. You know this one by heart, not just because the priests told it, but because it's whispered by mothers to daughters, by lovers in secret. Osiris, cut into pieces by his jealous brother Set. Isis, devoted wife and goddess of magic, scouring the land for his scattered parts. She finds all but one, his phallus, lost, devoured, erased. So she makes one, not from stone or dream, but from magic. A golden one, they say, and with it, she brings him back to life, just long enough to create their son, Horus. It's not just a myth, it's a memory of how love defies death, how sex is not just about flesh, but about restoration, power. The sacred craft of bringing back what was lost. You've seen it in tombs, Isis hovering above Osiris, her wings outstretched, her body angled in that unmistakable pose of union. This is not scandal, this is cosmology. And you carry that same current. You walk past vendors selling blue faience amulets shaped like naked goddesses, frogs, phalluses. You've seen incense mixed with herbs that awaken the womb or ease the fire of hunger. No one hides these things. You've heard of spells too, some simple, whispered over oil before a festival, others more potent, written on papyrus and burned beside someone's doorway. Spells to attract a lover, to cool someone's passion, to reunite those who've strayed. They don't always work, but belief is its own kind of magic. One woman in your village swears by her charm, a scrap of linen tied with 7 knots, buried beneath a date tree. She says her husband stopped wandering after that. Whether it was the charm or her newfound confidence, no one knows. What you know is this: the body and spirit are not separate. Desire, love, fertility, and ritual, they are one continuum, one echo, bouncing between the mundane and the divine. You begin to pray differently, not just for health or grain, but for clarity, for understanding, for the courage to let yourself be touched without losing yourself, for the strength to say yes and mean it, or no and be heard. You light oil in your room. You write on scraps of papyrus, not letters, but feelings. Symbols only you understand. You begin to see your own body as a temple, not in metaphor, but in purpose. You cleanse it. You honor it. You anoint it not just to smell good, but to declare yourself alive. The gods do not mock your desire, they share it. Even Thoth, god of wisdom, sometimes appears beside lovers in tombs, writing their names, their unions, their echoes into eternity. Even Anubis, guardian of the dead, wraps lovers in shrouds not to silence them, but to carry them into the next life, still joined. And if the gods embrace this, who are you to doubt it? One evening, a festival begins. The sky glows with firelight. The drums begin, low and rolling. You see people dressed in their finest, not for vanity, but to radiate. Women in linen so sheer it becomes part of their skin. Men painted with coal, smelling of cedarwood and spice. You join them. Not to find someone, not to prove something, but to be part of the pulse. And as you dance, moving like the river, like the wind curling through temple columns, you feel it. Your body is not wrong. It is an offering, a conduit, a prayer. Later, you sit beneath a fig tree, alone but not lonely. You watch couples pass by, not with envy, but with knowing. You are part of this, part of the long, sacred lineage of bodies touching, not to conquer, not to escape, but to remember, to belong, to bless and be blessed. You whisper a name, maybe a god's, maybe a lover's, into the darkness, and the darkness whispers back. The day you hear your neighbor's daughter is getting married, the whole village shifts. It isn't loud, no trumpets, no announcements. But you can feel it, like the way the Nile stirs before it rises. Women begin to gather herbs with extra care. Cloth is dyed deeper, richer. Bread is baked in double batches. There's laughter, yes, but a kind of breathless tension too, like everyone knows something is about to change. You watch her, the bride, from across the courtyard. She looks no different, and yet everything about her glows, not with makeup, not with perfume, though both are there, but with a kind of inner hum. She is stepping into a new rhythm, and in Egypt, that rhythm has its own gravity. Marriage here is not what it would become centuries later. There are no massive dowries. No forced parades, no men in powdered wigs, demanding virginity as if it were a currency. Marriage, for most, is practical, but not without affection, not without touch, not without, at its heart, the expectation of shared nights and whispered mornings. There's no sacred vow before a god, no temple decree needed. What matters is agreement, consent, exchange. A shared understanding that two people will live, work, and sleep beside each other. That their hands will dig the same earth, their bodies will warm the same bed. But it's not just about beds, it's about safety, status, stability. A woman who marries gains protection, legal and economic. She can own property, she can divorce, she can, in some cases, even keep custody of her children. That's more than most women in the world will have for centuries. You hear stories of wives managing estates while husbands work in distant fields, of couples who work side by side in markets, of husbands who write love poems for their wives on scraps of linen, some so intimate you almost feel you shouldn't read them. One fragment survives in your village, passed down like a sacred charm. She is more beautiful than all others. Her gaze blinds more than sunlight on water. When she enters, my legs fail me. I do not eat. I do not sleep. I wait for her breath like a thirsty man waits for the flood. It's not fantasy. It's the quiet truth of two people choosing each other. Still, there are rules. Matches are often arranged, but not without conversation. A girl may voice her preference. A boy may decline a union. Elders guide, but they don't dictate. Love can bloom, slowly, sometimes awkwardly, even within arranged marriages. And sex? It is expected, but not enforced. There are remedies for shyness, herbs, incense, rituals that bless the bed with fertility and calm, but no one is pushed, dragged, or shamed. The first night is private, always, no audience. No blood-stained sheets held aloft, just two people, often strangers, learning each other by moonlight, sometimes clumsy, sometimes tender, always sacred. And if it doesn't go smoothly, there is understanding. The god Bez watches over the bed, not to enforce, but to protect, to encourage, to bless. He smiles from the carved bedposts, reminding the couple that pleasure is not a race. It is a rhythm. It will come. You've heard women speak softly of their first nights, some with joy, others with confusion, but none with terror. Because fear here is not the foundation, respect is. And consent, while not shouted from rooftops, is woven into the fabric of daily life. A man who forces is shamed. A woman who refuses is not cast out. The community, while not perfect, knows the difference between desire and domination. Even in legal texts, there are protections. A woman may leave a husband may be fined for violence. A child belongs to the mother by default. You begin to see marriage not as ownership, but as alignment, a shared household, a shared table, a shared bed. Sometimes love grows after the wedding, sometimes it arrives before, and sometimes it never comes, and that too is quietly endured. But there is space for choice, for affection, for the possibility that two people might not just live together, but ache together, laugh together, collapse into the same silences. You help with the preparations. You grind henna leaves into paste. You help lace ribbons into her hair. You see her glance toward the boy, not a stranger after all, and you see something flicker in her smile. Hope, desire, a question perhaps. Later, at the ceremony, the couple sits beneath a canopy. Friends toss grains, children giggle, wine is passed. There's no priest, no lecture, just blessings, spoken by mothers, fathers, neighbors. She will be like the lotus, someone says, opening gently, drinking the sun. He will be like the sycamore, another adds, strong in shade and fruit. And then they go, hand in hand, into a house not yet warmed by their voices, into a bed not yet wrinkled by restless nights, into a future written in breath, in sweat, in patience. You stay behind, watching the stars rise, and for the first time, you wonder not just what it is to love, but what it is to be chosen, to be seen not as a vessel, not as an ornament, but as a partner. Marriage here is not perfection, but it is possibility. You walk home slowly, your feet dusted in flower petals and spilled wine. You lie in bed and whisper a name you haven't yet dared say aloud. And in the quiet, you imagine a room of your own, a lover who waits, not as a prize, but as a partner. Not to conquer, but to hold. The first time you see it, your breath catches, not because it's shocking, but because it's so intimate. A wall. Not in a temple, not in a palace, but on the crumbling side of a worker's tomb, far from where priests walk or scribes sit, and on it, scratched by a steady hand, are words, not prayers, not names, but longing. A simple line. I waited where you said. You never came. My chest is now a pot without fire. It's not addressed to anyone by name, but you feel it in your ribs, a slow ache, like memory. Someone wrote this for someone who made their breath quicken and then disappear. This is your first lesson, that the people of Egypt didn't only speak of desire in papyrus scrolls or sacred rites. They etched it into stone, whispered it into clay, sang it into linen. Love, and the hunger that came with it, was not confined to private thoughts. It spilled into the streets, into the air, into the walls of tombs and the corners of doorways. In one of the poetry scrolls passed between apprentices in your village, a young girl writes, "He came from behind, not with hands, but with laughter. My sandals slipped, my knees forgot the dust." Another, clearly older, possibly married, writes, "He leaves at dawn. I press my face to the place where he slept. It is still warm. It is not enough." These are not epics. They are moments, fleeting, specific, scented with the breath of real lives. And they reveal something most history books forget to mention, that people in Egypt felt as deeply as you do. They longed, they waited, they reached for touch, and sometimes they reached in vain. You begin to notice more of them. these quiet declarations, sometimes carved into pots, sometimes buried in tombs alongside the dead. Messages not to the gods, but to lovers, perhaps hoping they'd meet again in the afterlife. One particularly worn piece reads, "If you are reborn before me, wait. I will walk barefoot through flame and lotus to find you." You learn from a neighbor, an old woman who once cleaned the homes of scribes, that even official letters sometimes contained hints. One merchant, requesting a trade deal, adds a postscript. "Tell your sister that her scent has followed me down 3 cities. I cannot sleep. Return soon." Not everyone is a poet, but everyone feels the tug. Even in the grand temples of Karnak or Luxor, where formality reigns, you see hints. A depiction of a goddess not just in power, but in touch, hand resting on her lover's thigh, eyes half closed. Subtle, but unmistakable. The hieroglyphs themselves often play with this. The word for desire, sometimes rendered with a lotus, a heart, and a hand. Visual, bodily, gentle. And then there are the drawings, found hidden in worker villages on scraps of limestone, the so-called ostraca. Some are crude, others tender, but all of them real. One shows a man and a woman embracing, their limbs entangled like vines. Another, more humorous, shows a woman atop a man, offering him a cup of wine while he holds her hips. There's laughter in the lines, even now. Scholars might call these erotic graffiti. But to you, they are confessions. Evidence that love in Egypt was not always lofty. Sometimes it was playful, sometimes ridiculous, sometimes quiet, always human. Your father tells you that his father used to leave lotus petals outside your mother's door before they were married. Not whole flowers, just petals, one each morning. And when she finally left one on his doorstep, he knew. Even now, older couples hold hands beneath their robes when they walk through the fields. You've seen it. The gentle press of fingers in rhythm with the Nile's current. And when someone dies, it's not uncommon to find a small box in their tomb. Sealed, personal. Inside, scraps of poems, perfume bottles, a lock of hair, memory preserved. One scribe wrote in his own tomb, "I kissed her once, when the stars blinked out in the dawn. If no one remembers us, this wall will." You find comfort in that even if your own love never makes it to papyrus or stone, it might still echo, in the way you say someone's name, in the warmth that lingers after they've left, in the dust on your sandals when you walk the path they once walked. And maybe, just maybe, one day someone will find a piece of cloth, a broken cup, a faint carving, and know that you loved, that you reached, that your breath once matched someone else's. You lie in bed that night, fingertips tracing invisible letters into the air, not for the gods, for the one who will read them in silence and feel somehow known. At night, when the air has cooled and the wind slips soft through the papyrus reeds, you hear the quiet sounds of life in its most tender rhythm. A rustle of linen, a breath caught, then released, a laugh, stifled, then let go, like a bird finally freed from its woven cage. These are the sounds of intimacy, not of conquest, not of shame, but of bodies learning each other slowly, like one learns the stars, not in a rush, but in reverence. The bed is not a throne, it is not a battleground. It is a raft, made of palm wood and twine, covered with mats of woven reeds, or, if you're lucky, linen soft as river mist. It creaks sometimes, but it holds, like the bodies that lie on it, worn from labour, warmed by hope, ready to float together into a world that belongs only to them. In Egypt, the bedroom is not hidden far from the world. It's part of the home, a room among rooms. But within it, a kind of sacred quiet exists. A hush that falls not because someone demands it, but because the body demands presence. When you enter the space of another, truly enter, it's not with noise, it's with care. The linens are perfumed, not heavily, just enough to suggest. A hint of blue lotus, a touch of cinnamon oil. The sort of scent that doesn't shout, but stays with you long after you've left, like a secret tucked behind the ear. The walls are often bare, but sometimes, a single amulet hangs from a peg. A carved bez, tongue out, hands raised, smiling his protective smile. Or a sprig of herbs, mint or chamomile, meant to soothe nerves and encourage softness. The light comes from an oil lamp. Its flicker, not unlike the pulse in your wrist when someone brushes your waist by accident, or your fingers when they brush back. There are no instruction manuals, no guides. What you know, you've learned from gestures, from overheard whispers. From poetry, yes, and from the look in someone's eyes when they ask without words. May I? It's not always smooth. Sometimes elbows bump. Sometimes there's a laugh at the wrong moment, or a strand of hair that won't stay out of the way. Sometimes a body doesn't respond like it did yesterday. But no one curses the river for changing its current. You adapt, you listen, not to voices, but to breathing, to the way a shoulder turns, to the pause before a hand returns a touch. The linens shift beneath you. The room breathes with you. And slowly, you realize something that no scroll ever told you. Sex, in Egypt, is not about performance. It is about presence. You are not here to prove. You are here to feel. Your partner's skin smells of salt and sun. Their hands carry the stories of tools, of weaving, of grinding grain, calloused, yes, but steady. When they touch you, it is not like the touch of kings or scribes. It is real, warm, anchored. They do not say your name. They do not need to. They see you. And when they lean close, the world softens. The clay of your day melts. The aches in your legs release. Your mind stops listing what must be done tomorrow. All that exists now is the slide of linen, the quiet hum in your chest, and the miracle of being allowed, just this once, to dissolve into another. There are moments when even the gods seem to step back. They do not intervene. They do not demand praise. They watch, perhaps, with something like nostalgia. For what is more divine than two mortals meeting in the dark, sharing breath, anchoring each other against the chaos of the world? Outside, the Nile keeps flowing. A dog barks in the distance. Somewhere, a child stirs in their sleep. But here, in this room, the universe has narrowed to a heartbeat, and then two, and then one. When it is over, or when it changes into something quieter, you do not rush away. No one turns on lights. There are no clocks. You lie still, your skin damp. Your limbs tangled. Your breath slower now, but still yours. Sometimes your partner speaks. Sometimes they don't. Both are allowed. You think of those who came before you, of Isis and Osiris, of the lovers who left poems etched into pots, of the nameless hands that painted figures onto tomb walls, their limbs entwined, their eyes closed. You think they knew this hush, this fullness. This warmth that has nothing to do with heat and everything to do with being known, even if only for a night. When you rise, eventually, you do so gently. You pour water for each other. You share a fig. You laugh, softly, so as not to disturb the night. And then you part. Not always forever. Sometimes you'll return. Sometimes you won't. But you will remember. The way linen felt beneath you. The flicker of the lamp. The sound of someone breathing not beside you, but with you. Because in Egypt, sex is not an event. It is a rhythm, a remembering, a return to the body, to balance, to being. You've heard the saying, even the fish of the Nile do not all swim in the same water. It's an old phrase, whispered with a shrug, often when someone steps outside the bounds of what is expected. And nowhere is it more quietly uttered than in the conversations about sex between classes. Because in Egypt, though the gods may bless everyone the same way, not every bed is equally soft. Not every touch carries the same weight. Desire doesn't know rank, but permission does. You've seen it before, even before you had words for it. The daughter of a priest walking with her head held high, dressed in fine white linen so sheer it glowed in the sun, while a boy from the labouring quarter paused mid-step to look, just once. That look, not predatory, not aggressive, but heavy. Waited with a kind of resignation. She did not glance back. She would never be allowed to. And yet, you've heard the stories. Whispers exchanged over grinding stones, or behind baskets of dates. The nobleman's son who found himself in love, or perhaps just infatuated, with the maid who lit the lamps each evening. The widow who turned to a young gardener, not for company, but for something warmer. These are not fantasies. They are the quiet, unspoken truths behind many closed doors. In a land where beauty is honoured and pleasure is sacred, the reality remains. Power shapes proximity. A man with coin can admire, pursue, and possess. A woman of lower station, especially if she is young, beautiful, and dependent, may be seen as available, regardless of whether her heart agrees. You've seen it in the way some women walk, fast, eyes down, hands hidden. You've seen it in how servants are trained to avert their gaze. You've seen it in the way gossip curls around certain homes like smoke. She doesn't say no, they say. But what they don't ask is whether she ever felt she could. Still, not every story is one of imbalance. There are true connections too, rare, but they exist. The potter's apprentice who married a merchant's niece after months of quiet conversations in the shade of the kiln. The scribe who fell for the weaver who brought him cloth, and whose letters to her were found years later, folded carefully in a jar beneath their shared floor. When the gap between classes is not too wide, the bridge can be built. But when the gulf is large, a servant and a noble, a guard and a highborn widow, then the rules shift. Sometimes the powerful grow careless. They take what they desire, and while laws exist, they rarely protect the lowborn. There are penalties on paper, but paper burns easily in the sun of Egypt. You've heard of women cast out for speaking up, and others who stayed silent, who bore children no one would acknowledge. You've seen boys punished not for the act, but for forgetting their place. Still, the body doesn't always listen to boundaries. Sometimes love, or lust, grows anyway, in the shade of the granary, in the quiet hour after festival. In the silence between a servant pouring oil and a master not looking away. And sometimes, perhaps more often than anyone will admit, it is mutual. Two people, drawn to each other across the lines of class, understanding that what they share will never be named aloud. That their moments will be tucked between duties, hidden behind smiles, never spoken of in the light. One woman, older now, once told you, "He was the only one who ever listened when I spoke." But he wore gold at his wrists, and I had dust on mine. So we laughed in shadows, and that was enough. You wonder if it was enough. And you wonder what it means to want someone who lives in a different world, one you might visit but never stay in. Sometimes you see it on the boats. The Nile carries more than grain and wine. It carries glances. It carries rumours. A noblewoman with painted nails and a servant whose hands linger too long. A royal envoy who always requests the same boatman. A singer at a banquet who sings for everyone, but watches only one. Sex between classes isn't new. It's as old as the kingdom itself. But while the act is ancient, the consequences remain contemporary. For the highborn, it may be a passing indulgence. For the lowborn, it can be everything. A hope, a danger, a child, a loss. You learn that some use spells to protect themselves. A servant might tuck a charm under her sash, not for love, but for choice. A phrase etched in ochre, "Let him see me as stone, unless I choose to soften." Others turn to silence, to boundaries, to knowing that sometimes the cost of touch is too great. And yet, desire is not always a beast. Sometimes it is a guest, knocking gently, offering warmth. And when permission is truly mutual, when eyes meet with yes on both sides, then something rare happens. The classes dissolve. Not in law, not in legacy, but in a single moment shared between skin and sky. You lie awake one night thinking about this, about the servant girl who braided your hair and hummed softly while doing so, about the merchant's son who once let your hand rest on his arm a moment too long when helping you cross a puddle. Nothing came of it, but something was there. And in a world so shaped by lines, painted, carved, imposed, those tiny crossings become sacred. You dream of a world where love is not bound by linen or rank, where your hands do not betray you. Where a kiss is not a trespass. You wake with the scent of incense in your nose and a name on your tongue. And though you never say it aloud, you carry it with you. Like a secret, like a wish, like a promise the gods may one day allow. There is a night, not unlike this one, when the moon seems unusually bright. Not because of any omen, but because of what it catches. A glance that lasts too long. A door that closes too softly. Two silhouettes, close together, then drifting apart. You don't ask questions, not aloud, but the village knows, and it doesn't need to speak. The way people walk the next morning, the way silence thickens around certain names, it's enough. Infidelity, even in Egypt, where desire is sacred, where the body is not sin but song, betrayal still stings. Because while the gods gave you the right to want, they also gave you the responsibility to choose with care. Marriage is a contract, not only of flesh, but of trust. And when that thread frays, it is not just hearts that ache, but reputations, futures, homes. You remember when it happened to your aunt. She was not young, her marriage was not cruel, but somewhere it grew cold, like bread left uncovered, like oil left too long in the sun. And then, someone else smiled at her differently, spoke her name like a question, not an obligation. It was small at first. Meetings in the market, conversations too quick to be casual. The sharing of an orange beneath the sycamore, but the village sees everything. Soon, her name became a murmur, and her husband's silence became stone. They did not fight, they simply unspoke each other. And when she left, no scandal, no shouts. It was as if the Nile itself sighed. You asked your mother once, was she wrong? She didn't answer, not right away. She just said, sometimes hunger isn't for food, but you must still ask if you're stealing. Infidelity in Egypt is not punished by stoning, not burned at the stake, but it is punished in other ways, quieter, longer. The law, written in reed and decree, allows a husband to repudiate a wife for unfaithfulness. A wife too may leave, but it's harder. She must prove not just a wandering heart, but cruelty, neglect, danger. And even then, the whispers remain. You've seen the protective amulets, hung over beds, buried under doorways, charms not for passion, but for loyalty. Spells that say, let him dream only of me. Oils anointed with prayers, let her see none but me. Some say they work, some say trust is stronger, but others say trust must be watched. The gods do not forbid longing, but they frown upon betrayal that breaks a bond meant to be whole. Still, desire is wild, and not all affairs are cruel. Some begin with kindness, a forgotten smile, a hand that listens, a voice that hears. You've seen lovers who tried not to be. Who turned away until their hearts ached from holding back. Who counted the cost and still chose. Were they wrong or just human? You once found a fragment of papyrus behind an old chest, written in a hurried hand. My body sleeps beside her, but my soul kneels at your door. It wasn't signed, but you wonder, was it kept in secret or never sent at all? The truth is, infidelity is not always about lust. Sometimes it is about loneliness. About the space between two people who no longer look at each other, not with anger, but with absence. And into that space, someone else steps. A neighbor, a friend, a stranger who remembers your favorite song. You've heard men speak of their wives not as lovers, but as tasks. Women speak of their husbands as weights, not warmth. And when someone else lights the fire that once burned naturally, who's to blame? The one who strikes the match? Or the one who let the hearth go cold? Still, betrayal has consequences. Even if the gods don't punish it directly, the village does. A woman cast out of her home, a man losing status, face, sometimes children. Even when forgiveness comes, it is brittle. And then there's jealousy, its own kind of sickness. You've seen the signs, eyes that watch too closely. Questions asked too often. A man who counts how many figs his wife sells at market, and to whom. A woman who checks the linen for scents that don't belong. Jealousy, when it grows, twists love into possession. And possession in Egypt is dangerous. The gods warn against imbalance. Ma'at, the cosmic harmony, demands equilibrium. Love cannot be owned, only chosen. And when choice is forced, it dies. Some turn to magic, darker spells, binding rituals. Potions that promise loyalty but steal the soul. You heard once of a woman who used a binding spell on her husband. He stayed, but he stopped laughing. His eyes turned inward. She said he was hers forever, but he was no longer himself. Desire that demands obedience is not love. It is control. And even the gods step back from that. But what of reconciliation? It happens. You've seen it. A man who strayed returns, humble. A woman whose heart wandered finds her way home. They don't forget, but they rebuild. Not the same house, a new one, with walls made not of innocence, but honesty, with a bed that knows loss, and therefore values presence. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And when it doesn't, the path is divorce. In Egypt, it is legal, not easy, but possible. A woman may take her belongings, her children, her name. A man may walk away. But if he leaves debt or damage, the law may follow. And after, life continues. Scars become skin. And the heart, if it dares, loves again. You think of all the hearts in your village, beating behind baskets, behind doors, behind carefully arranged smiles. You think, how many carry the weight of betrayal, of longing unspoken, of forgiveness never offered? You lie in bed, the linen cool beneath you, and you wonder, if love is a thread, how many times can it break before it no longer mends? And then you remember another saying. Carved above the door of a house long abandoned, we broke, but we still held water. Perhaps that is enough. You're told early on that the gods made rules for a reason, not to punish, to protect. Still, you know, not every desire follows those rules. Not every touch waits for a ceremony, and not every love walks proudly in the light. Sex outside of marriage. In Egypt it happens. Of course it does. How could it not? Bodies bloom before contracts are signed. Hearts wander. Solitude grows heavy, and sometimes the ache in your chest finds a mirror in someone else's. But while desire is natural, how it's acted upon, that's another story. The line between accepted and scandalous is delicate and drawn not by gods, but by people. You've heard of the ladies of the night, but they aren't hidden behind veils, not always. In the workers' village outside the Valley of the Kings, there are women who offer more than beer, houses where music plays late, where laughter is too loud, where the linen is too fine for weaving alone. They are not slaves. They choose, most of them. They decorate their doorways with charms, lotus petals for beauty, the ankh for life, the eye of Horus to ward off judgment. Men visit, so do scribes, sometimes even a priest when the stars are right and the heart too full of silence. It is not illegal, it is not blessed, it is tolerated, but only in its place, like wine, sweet, but not for every day. You asked once as a child why those women weren't married. The answer came in a sigh. Some offer the body to eat, others to feed. You didn't understand then. Now you see the nuance. Not all who sell sex do so for coin. Some trade for safety, for housing, for the favor of someone who can keep them from hunger, and some do it because it is the only space where they feel wanted, not for name or dowry or lineage, but for their laughter, their skin, their songs. You once met one, by accident. She was older than you expected, eyes lined with coal and years, hands that moved with a dancer's memory. She sold amulets at the market too, for love, fertility, sleep. She saw you watching and said, "Don't look like that. The gods gave me hips and tongue and wit. I use them all." She laughed, and it wasn't bitter, it was tired, still proud. But you know, not all stories are so clean. There are girls taken, not asked, boys used, not chosen. There are hands that grip, not invite, eyes that follow, not admire. When sex leaves the realm of consent, Egypt has words for it: accusations, trials, punishments. The law does not turn away, but it does not always hear the weak. You've seen women whose voices faded under louder names. You've heard men defend power with phrases like, "She said yes," with her eyes. But the gods do not smile on this. And Bes, protector of the vulnerable, is carved fiercest on the doors of the smallest homes. Still, consensual sex outside marriage isn't always for coin. Sometimes it's for love. You've known couples who never married, yet stayed together for years. A baker and her neighbor, a potter and the man who swept the streets. They lived simply, quietly, without rings, but with rhythm. No ceremony, but devotion. They were mocked by some, ignored by others. But they seemed content. And in this land, that's rare enough to be holy. There are also those whose love is short, a single night. A single hour, shared under stars, in the shadow of a temple, behind the warmth of a marketplace at dusk. Not shameful, not blessed, just what it is, ephemeral, but etched into memory like ink into linen. You've heard of rituals too, quiet folk ones. A woman placing red thread under her tongue before kissing someone she shouldn't want. A man drinking beer with his left hand so the gods won't see. Of course, the gods always see. But sometimes you think they look away, not in anger, but in mercy, because they know what loneliness tastes like. They've seen it, even in the afterlife. There are texts that say the dead still touch each other, still ache, still remember how bodies felt before sand filled their mouths. One funerary spell reads, "May I lie with her in the field of reeds, not beside, but within. Let no priest find fault. Let no husband rise in judgment. Even in death, the heart wants what it wants. And the body, even a shadow of it, remembers. Still, caution is wise. A child born outside marriage has no guarantee. Unless claimed, they may be raised with nothing. A woman without family support may find herself cast out. A man who loves freely too often may one day find no one left to hold his name. So people weigh their choices. Some burn incense and wait. Others risk, knowing the cost. And some simply close their eyes and say, just this once, just for the warmth. Just for the memory, just to feel chosen. You lie awake one night, breath shallow. A name on your tongue, a memory on your skin. You don't regret, but you don't speak of it. Because some love stories are written only on the inside of the heart, and there they stay. You've walked past the tombs since you were a child, low mounds, some carved into stone, some rising like small pyramids in the dust. At first, they were just shapes, places where the old go. where families leave bread and beer and whisper the names of those they miss. But now, as you pass them with older eyes, something shifts. You begin to see love stories hidden in the stone. Not tales of war or kings or conquest, but of hands held, of glances exchanged, of lives shared and mourned. In Egypt, death isn't the end. It's a doorway, and sex, even in the afterlife, walks through that door with you. You learned it young, though not directly. Your grandmother's tomb was painted with symbols of peace, geese, water lilies, baskets of fruit. But tucked behind one pillar, barely visible unless you knew where to look, was a simple scene. A man and woman, sitting side by side, their fingers touching. No grand gesture, just a quiet connection. When you asked, your uncle smiled softly. She wanted to be with him there, he said, like they were here. It stayed with you, not just the image, but the idea that desire doesn't die. That the longing for closeness, for warmth, for the breath of another brushing your cheek, it continues, even when the heart stops. Many tombs reflect this belief. Some show couples embracing, their limbs entwined in ways that scholars once called symbolic. But you know better. There's nothing symbolic about a hand placed gently on a thigh, or lips close enough to kiss. They were real, and they hoped to be real again. In the afterlife, the field of reeds, that eternal version of Egypt, was said to be full of everything beautiful: clean water, fertile land, plentiful food, music, and love. But not love as distant admiration, love as touch, as scent, as shared sleep beneath golden skies. To be reborn meant to remember, not just who you were, but who you loved, who held you, who whispered your name when you didn't think anyone listened. Some tombs have love poems written on their walls, soft, aching words. You've read one with your own eyes. When I rise, let her rise with me. When I eat, let her taste it too. When I lie in the cool fields, let her be the breeze upon my skin. The words are old, but the feeling is not. You once asked a temple scribe if the gods approved of this. He looked up from his scroll, blinked, and said, "Why wouldn't they? They made us to love. Why would they unmake it after death?" It's not always spoken of. But among women, among men who've lost their lovers, the belief persists that the dead can visit, that dreams aren't just dreams, that sometimes, when you feel a warmth on your back or a hush beside your ear, it is someone reaching across the veil, not to scare but to say, "I remember." And in those moments, sex is not about the body, it's about the echo. You've heard stories, a woman widowed young, who still slept on only half the mat. Who never took another partner, because, as she said, he promised he'd wait for me in the reeds. A man who wrote letters to his dead wife every new moon, burned them with incense, and whispered, "For your eyes only." And sometimes, there are more physical tokens. Amulets shaped like phalluses, small figurines of couples embracing. Papyrus spells that begin with, "May my member rise in the afterlife as it did in life," followed by requests for vitality, closeness, the ability to love as one did when breath still moved through the chest. These weren't vulgar, they were hopeful. Because for Egyptians, Death was not a drying out. It was a continuation, a second chance. And to go into that second life without the ability to love fully, in every way, was a kind of hell. So they prepared. They asked for it. They painted it on walls, not only for pleasure, but for connection. Because sex, in its most sacred form, was never just about flesh. It was about being seen, being known, being held in a world that so often forgets to touch gently. In the tombs of the wealthy, scenes of banquets abound, music, wine, dancing girls, sometimes glimpses of affection so sensual they seem to breathe. And in tombs of the humble, a man fishing with his wife beside him, a couple harvesting wheat together. A woman combing her partner's hair. These too are erotic, not because they involve touch, but because they show love that persists, that endures, that says, even when I am bone and linen, I will reach for you. You begin to see your own life differently, not as a line that ends, but as a loop, a spiral. And in that loop, every moment of closeness, every kiss, every shared sleep, every whispered secret in the dark becomes sacred, becomes remembered. You imagine your own tomb now. Not with gold, but with touch. A wall painted with you and someone, maybe not even someone you've met yet, sitting beside a pool, feet in the water, fingers interlocked. No need for words, no need for crowns. Just this, a love so full it follows you beyond silence. You think of all the tombs buried under sand, all the stories waiting to be uncovered, all the lovers who still, somehow, hold hands in the dark. And you wonder, when your time comes, will your name still taste sweet on someone's lips? Will your skin still remember where they touched? Will your love too cross into the reeds, not as a ghost, but as a promise? You close your eyes, and in the hush of your own breath, you think, yes, you've always known that the body tells stories before the mouth learns how, that the skin speaks first, in goosebumps, in shivers, in the way your spine curves instinctively toward warmth. And in Egypt, the female body speaks in chapters, each one marked by rhythms the gods themselves carved into time. The swell of breasts in adolescence, the blood that comes like the Nile's flood, the soft roundness of the belly as life stirs inside it. And then, the birth, that crossing, that storm, that sacred tearing open. In your village, birth is not hidden. It is not feared. Though it is feared, of course, in that way that powerful things always are. It is seen as threshold, as trial, as magic made flesh. The women gather when the time comes. Not just the midwives, sisters, aunts, friends. They enter the birthing room like priestesses, bearing water, cloth, prayers. They sing sometimes, or hum, a low sound, grounding, soothing, like the Nile in spring. You remember when your cousin gave birth. The room smelled of salt and crushed herbs. There was blood, yes, but also milk, also laughter after the storm passed. Also the deep, exhausted sobbing that sounds not of sadness, but of arrival. The child, when held, seemed impossibly small, and yet held the weight of history in her closed fist. That day you learned, the female body in Egypt is not weak. It is a riverbed, meant to split, to hold, to flood, and to heal. And sex, in this context, is not just about desire. It's about continuation, not just of bloodlines, but of hope. The moment a woman feels that first movement within her, everything shifts. She becomes a vessel, not just of life, but of fear, of expectation, of pride. There are rituals for every stage. When a woman suspects she's pregnant, she may pee on barley and wheat. If the seeds sprout, it's a sign. Life is coming. Some say if the barley grows faster, it's a boy. Wheat, a girl. Science aside, it's the ritual that matters. It's the attention, the honoring of the unseen. The preparation begins. Statuettes of Taweret, the hippopotamus goddess of childbirth, are placed near the bed. She guards the mother, protects the child. Her image, round and strong, is not beautiful in the way of scroll paintings, but she is fierce, and that is its own kind of beauty. Amulets of Bez hang from doorways. Bowls of water are placed beneath beds to cool the heat of pain. And always, always, there is touch. The touch of hands anointing the mother with oils. The touch of other women, grounding her in their collective strength. The touch of the earth, as some still prefer to squat over sun-warmed bricks, letting gravity assist where it can. Birth in Egypt is noisy, raw, holy. And when it's over, when the child's cry cuts through the sweat and silence, a feast is prepared. Bread, beer, meat, if it can be spared. Not just to nourish, but to celebrate, because life has arrived. And with it, proof that sex is not just about pleasure, it is also about becoming. You once asked your mother if sex changes after childbirth. She looked at you and said, "Of course it does. Everything changes. But change isn't loss. Sometimes it's depth." She was right. The body after birth is different. Softer in some places, stronger in others. Marked. But in Egypt, marked does not mean damaged. It means witnessed. The stretch marks on a woman's belly are seen as rivers, signs of journey. Her breasts, heavier now, are not just for feeding, but for resting against. Her hips, wider, yes, are spoken of not with critique, but with reverence. There is even poetry for this. You read one once. She walks like the moon pulling the tide. Her steps carry the memory of 100 births. She is not new, she is true. The men too shift. Some pull away, lost in fear or confusion. Others draw closer, awed. The best ones learn that the body they once touched for hunger is now also home to history. And they touch differently, softer, more slowly, not less desirous, but more attuned. Sex after birth is not less. It is lower, deeper, like the Nile in its quiet season, still powerful but patient. You've heard of women who fear they've lost their desirability, but others, older, wiser, laugh. Now is when you begin to own your body, one said, because now you know what it can do. You know what pain tastes like, and what it turns into. You know what love looks like when it's screaming, bleeding, and then sighing against your skin. The child, when grown, may never understand, but they'll feel it, in how you carry them, in how you speak of the world, in how you speak of yourself. And perhaps one day, they too will understand that sex is not an act. It is a sequence, a breath that begins in longing, pauses in pleasure, and exhales in creation. You lie in bed, remembering the sounds of that birthing room, the cries, the songs, the silence afterward, thick, sacred, whole. You run a hand over your belly. Whether it has known birth or not, it has known change. It has known touch, and it will one day know more. You whisper a thank you, not to the gods this time, to your own skin, to your own breath, to the heat that brought you into being, and the heat that perhaps will bring someone else. It comes quietly, like most important things, not with a scream, but with a stain. The first blood. You were perhaps 12 or 13, maybe younger. It doesn't matter now. What matters is the way the air felt different that day. Heavy, like the gods were watching more closely. The blood came without warning, a deep red mark on white linen. A feeling in your belly like something ancient had awakened. You were not ill. You were not cursed. You were becoming. In Egypt, this transformation is not hidden. It is not shouted either, but it is known, respected, sometimes feared, often misunderstood, but never ignored. Menstruation is a doorway, not only into adulthood, but into a world of new rhythms. Your body now speaks a new language, in tides, in aches, in signs. And others begin to treat you differently. Your mother pulls you aside. She doesn't tell you to be ashamed. She tells you to be wise. This blood, she says, is a gift. But gifts must be carried carefully. She gives you cloths, herbs, and advice wrapped in metaphor. Drink mint to ease the heat, she says. Avoid onions when your belly churns. She doesn't explain why the gods chose this path for women, only that they did. And the gods do not choose lightly. You hear whispers from older girls, from aunties, from midwives, that the blood has power, that it can cleanse, that it can curse, that in it lives the potential for life and death, creation and decay. You learn that in some temples, menstruating women do not enter the inner sanctum, not because they are unclean, but because they are too full of life, too raw, too near the veil. The blood is not impurity, it is intensity. Too much power can be dangerous, even for the divine. Some women speak of visions during their bleeding, of dreams filled with gods, with rivers, with bones whispering their names. Others say they feel empty, tired, like the Nile after harvest, drained but waiting. You learn to track your cycle like the priests track the stars. There are days for solitude, for hot baths and silence, and there are days when the world calls louder, when your skin is more alert, your hunger sharper. The men do not always understand. They smell the blood sometimes, not with their noses, with their instincts. Some are repelled, others drawn closer, as if your body suddenly speaks a dialect they forgot they once knew. You notice the change in your own desires, in your patience, in your tenderness, and you learn, slowly, that your cycle is not a punishment. It is a pattern, one the land follows too. The Nile floods, then retreats. The fields bloom, then dry. Your womb is not so different from the earth. It too holds potential. It too must rest, bleed, recover. You hear myths that echo your body, of goddesses who retreat once a month, who descend into silence and return wiser, of Isis weeping until the Nile rose, her tears the blood of longing. You wonder if this is where the rhythm began, not in the stars, but in her. Some women hide their bleeding, others mark it, with a thread tied around the wrist, with a flower placed in their hair, with a certain perfume worn only during those days, not as warning, as recognition, because when you bleed, you see the world differently. Colors feel sharper, voices louder, your own skin heavier. There is power in this state, not the loud kind. the kind that lives in caves, in wells, in the shadows beneath tombs. And like all power, it is both blessing and burden. You've heard of blood used in magic, mixed with oils, burned with herbs, buried beneath thresholds, to bind, to protect, to remember. Some say it must never be spilled on sacred ground. Others say it makes the ground sacred. No one agrees, but everyone listens. Because menstrual blood, your blood, is not dismissed. It is discussed, feared sometimes. But always acknowledged. In your own home, you create rituals, not taught, born from need. You warm bricks and place them near your belly. You hum songs that make no sense but soothe you anyway. You avoid sharp tools. You write things down, dreams, names, cravings, as if your body is telling you something you might forget later. You lie down more often. You walk slower. And in those days, sex becomes different. Not absent, just transformed. Some partners avoid you. Others seek you more. As if your heightened state awakens something in them. You decide what you allow, what you need, and that choice, that autonomy, becomes part of your rhythm too. Later, when your bleeding ends for the month, you feel lighter, not just in body, in spirit, as if you've passed through a portal. You light incense, wash your cloths, give thanks. To whom? You're not sure. Maybe to Isis, maybe to the Nile, maybe to your own blood for flowing and not failing. And when the next cycle comes, you do not flinch. You welcome it like a returning guest, one who brings stories, even if they spill from you in red. There are things not spoken aloud in the open courtyards, not because they are forbidden, but because they are too delicate for midday. Whispers carried on wind, not shouted from rooftops. And among these quiet things lives a truth you have sensed since you first understood longing. Not every desire moves in the direction the world expects. In Egypt, as in all places, love does not always follow straight lines. Sometimes it curves gently towards someone of the same voice, the same gait, the same shape. And while the walls of temples speak mostly of husband and wife, of masculine gods joining feminine ones in cosmic balance, there are other stories too. You only find them if you listen carefully, if you read not just the inscriptions, but the silences between them. There is, for instance, the tale of Horus and Set. Not just a story of conflict, but of tension, of dominance, of strange intimacy. Set, the god of chaos, is said to have tried to assert power over Horus not through battle alone, but through a sexual act, not as love, but as humiliation. But the story does not end there. Horus tricks Set. He catches his seed, prevents it from entering him, and in turn plants his own within Set's food. Later, the gods decide whose seed is where. And when Horus emerges victorious, they declare him the rightful heir. A strange tale, yes, full of symbolism, of politics, but also a story where male bodies are central to the power of sex, not as metaphor, as plot. Scholars debate it. Was it meant to shame? To moralize? But you read it differently. You see in it the acknowledgement, however twisted, that male-male sexuality was not unimaginable, not unrecorded. And in real life, you've seen the signs. Two men who live together, not as brothers, though that's what they say. One of them paints his lover's name in faint ink on the inside of a pot. You've read the graffiti in tombs, little poems signed by men to men. He looked at me, and the Nile rose twice that day. You've heard servants whisper of guards who sleep in the same bed, though no one dares ask why. And once, in the heat of festival, you saw two boys dancing, not facing the gods, but each other. And the way their eyes met, that wasn't ritual, that was recognition. Women, too. It's quieter, perhaps, more veiled, but present. Two widows who live together after their husbands die, never remarrying and always dressing for each other. A weaver who speaks of her beloved, but never gives a name. In the poetry scrolls, a line written by a woman. Her fingers traced my back like water across sand. I did not turn. I did not need to. It's not always safe. It's not always punished, either. It simply exists, on the margins, in the shade. You once asked an older woman, a midwife who had seen everything, what she thought of such things. She didn't blink. Love is where the eyes rest, she said, and the gods don't blink when it surprises them. There's no law in the scrolls that forbids it, no commandment carved into limestone, but also no celebration. Egypt's world is built on ma'at, balance, and to many, balance means male and female, flesh and opposite flesh. But those who live outside that mold, they are not evil, they are not cursed, they are simply unseen, and yet not erased. Some tombs hint at more. Two men buried together, sharing more than a resting place. An inscription that reads, "They shared bread, labor, laughter, and the house of sleep." No wives mentioned, no heirs, just each other. You stand before such a tomb one day. It is simple. But the way their names are carved, side by side, not one beneath the other, feels like a statement, not loud, but firm. You wonder what it was like for them, to live in a world where desire was accepted in form, but expected in direction, to wake each morning beside someone whose breath made the day feel possible, to cook, to argue, to lie down, not as secret, but as song. There is no festival for this kind of love, no rituals passed down in temples, but there are rituals still. A lock of hair saved in a box, a name carved beneath a bed frame, a kiss placed on the shoulder, not the mouth, because the mouth is watched. And you begin to understand that your own longings may not follow the path of grain and wine. They may bend towards someone who wears the same sash, who sings in the same key. And if that's true, then you are not broken. You are simply ancient in a way the scrolls forgot to mention. You dream of a world where lovers are buried side by side without explanation, where poems can be signed with two female names, where the gods look not at the shape of your partner, but the shape of your tenderness. You dream, and then you live. Not loudly, but fully. And when you place your hand on theirs beneath the table, and they don't pull away, that is enough. That is ceremony. That is blessing. There's something different about the way she walks, not faster, not slower. But with a rhythm, like she knows exactly where her hips belong in the space around her. You notice it before she speaks, before she looks up, before she chooses you. She is not royalty, not a priestess, not a woman gilded by birth or ceremony, but she has something that bends the air around her, a presence, a gravity. And when she speaks, not to you, but near you, the words cling to the inside of your ribs. You are not the first, nor will you be the last. Because in Egypt, the feminine is not quiet, it is not passive, it is not a vessel to be filled, but a flame to be approached with care. And desire, when it stirs in her, is not shameful, it is sacred, it is strategy, it is story. You learn this early, not in scrolls, but in glances, perfumes, gestures. You see the way older women speak of love, with a curl of the lip, a knowing in their laugh. They remember, they guide, they warn, but never scold. Because they know what it means to want, to feel the pulse behind the knees, the tingling in the belly when someone looks a little too long. They've wanted and been wanted, and sometimes not, and they've survived it all. You watch them prepare themselves, not for others but for the mirror. They mix oils, frankincense for warmth, myrrh for grounding, lotus for allure. They smear it along the neck, the wrists, behind the ears, not in excess. Just enough to be remembered after the room empties. Some wear red ochre on the lips. Others trace kohl around the eyes, not to hide, but to sharpen. To say, I see you. Do you see me? They wear linen that brushes the skin like breath. Jewelry not for wealth, but for sound. Anklets that chime when they walk. Bracelets that whisper when they reach. These are not ornaments. They are invitations, but never obligations. Because in Egypt, feminine desire is not always loud, but it is never absent. It simmers, and when it speaks, it does so with intention. You hear stories of women who used spells, not to force love, but to open doors. One would place a piece of rose quartz under her lover's pillow. Another whispered the same line each time she stirred her stew. Let his hunger lead him to me. Some wrote their names in wine on the skin of fruit. Some left earrings in the beds of men they hadn't yet touched, a promise or a warning. These rituals weren't desperate. They were deliberate. Like planting seeds, knowing not all will bloom, but each deserves earth. Desire for her is not constant, but when it rises, it's like the Nile in flood, undeniable, and it changes everything it touches. You once saw a girl, no older than you, stare down a boy who boasted of his lovers. She didn't shout, didn't flinch. She simply said, "Your words are loud because your touch is silent." He never spoke to her again, but he looked, always looked. You see women choose, sometimes boldly. Sometimes through silence, a fig placed on a doorstep, a hand resting a moment too long on a jug, a song sung a little too close to someone's ear. And sometimes, not choosing is the choice, because desire is not duty. Not every woman in Egypt wants to be touched. Some want only to be seen. Some want to want, but not today. Some remember pain when they should have felt pleasure. And they carry that too. There is space for them. There are oils for calming, songs for release. And friends who hold them through the ache. You hear of a healer, old, bent, smiling. She makes potions for desire, not for others, for the self, for women who've forgotten how to feel, or who want to feel again. She mixes blue lotus with honey, papyrus seed with pomegranate skin. Drink it, she says, then dance, alone if you must. Because the first body you learn is your own, and pleasure is not owed, it is owned. You lie awake sometimes, hand over belly, thinking of someone. Maybe a face you know, maybe a voice from a dream, maybe just the idea of touch, not for survival, not for children, not for praise, but for joy, pure, unapologetic, a feast without guilt. You light incense not to call anyone, but to remember yourself. You smooth oil into your skin and whisper, I am not waiting to be chosen. I am choosing. And the gods? They do not turn away. Hathor, she of the mirror and the sistrum, smiles. She sees you, and you, finally, see yourself. You've heard it since you were small. Stories of love lost, of lovers returned, of passion rekindled, not through words or letters, but through magic. Because in Egypt, when desire refuses to be quiet, it is sometimes written in ink and ash, sometimes sung over oil and flame, sometimes whispered into knots of string and buried under a lover's doorstep. Love spells. They're not the stuff of fairy tales. They're practical, common, tucked into drawers, hidden in jars. Scribbled in haste and buried with care. Not everyone uses them, but everyone knows someone who has. You remember the first one you saw. A scrap of papyrus folded 4 times, stained with oil, pressed between the pages of a prayer book. It read, "Let his eyes see only me. Let his mouth forget all other names. Let his feet forget every path but the one to my door." It wasn't signed, but it smelled faintly of cinnamon and clove. Someone had poured longing into it like wine into a cracked cup. You asked your neighbor, the one who sells herbs, if she believed in such things. She smiled, not answering, and reached for a jar. Inside, rose petals, crumbled bay leaves, pieces of blue lapis. Love, she said, is a kind of madness. Magic just makes it visible. She wasn't a priestess, but she knew the words, knew which gods to call, knew which oils to rub behind your ears before a festival, knew when to speak and when to let the spell do the speaking for her. You start to notice them. Little charms tied with red thread, bowls of salt left under beds, amulets buried in corners, carved not with names, but with desire. There's a papyrus in the temple that's always kept under lock. The scribes say it contains spells too strong for ordinary use, spells to make someone dream of you, to make them ache with memory, to tie their heart to yours across distance, across stubbornness, even across betrayal. One such spell begins. Let him wake calling my name. Let him sweat with want. Let no other arms cool his fire. Let me be his silence, his hunger, his sleep. You read it once, and it scared you. Not because of its power, but because of how much it sounded like you, the things you wished you could say, the way you wished someone would feel for you. And you realize then, magic is not separate from feeling. It is feeling. Distilled, directed, amplified. Sometimes it works. You know couples who claim a single charm kept them from falling apart. A wife who smeared honey under her husband's tongue while he slept. A lover who burned 7 petals and whispered a name into the flame. A girl who walked backwards to the river, carrying bread and salt, and returned to find a letter waiting on her doorstep. And sometimes it doesn't. Because even in Egypt, love cannot be forced. Not for long. A spell may open a door, but only the heart can choose to step through it. And yet, people try, because hope is louder than caution. And loneliness is a god all its own. There are darker spells too. Ones not for drawing love, but for stopping it. For unbinding, for forgetting. You've seen one written in charcoal. Let her name taste like ash in his mouth. Let her face fade from his eyes. Let her shadow never find him. These are not cast lightly. They cost, not just in herbs and words, but in energy, in memory. You met someone once who had used such a spell. A man with soft eyes and a voice like Riverstone. He said he had loved someone who never looked back, and so he'd asked the gods to take the feeling from him. They listened, he said, but I wish they hadn't. Because sometimes, forgetting hurts more than longing. You learn that love magic in Egypt is not manipulation. It's communication. It's grief. It's hunger given shape. When someone cannot speak their desire aloud, they write it. When someone fears they've been forgotten, they light oil and whisper. Not because they expect the gods to grant every wish, but because the act itself is healing. To write, to pray, to remember, to try. You light a candle one night. You don't say a spell, but you think of a name. You let it sit on your tongue like a question. You burn a sprig of myrrh, not for them, for you, to mark the moment, to say, I felt this, it mattered. And as the scent rises into the air, you feel something shift inside you, not the world, not them, but you. Because in Egypt, magic doesn't always change what's outside. Sometimes it changes what lives beneath your ribs. And that is a kind of spell too. You've walked past the temples your whole life, white stone rising from the dust, columns carved with stories, murals filled with gods in poses you've memorized before knowing what they meant. But it's only when you step inside, older, more aware of your own breath and its weight, que você começa a perceber que o desejo vive ali também, not hidden. Not denied, but transformed. In Egypt, the sacred and the sensual do not live in different rooms. They sleep side by side. Sometimes they are the same. You first notice it in the faces of the statues, not cold, not stern, but soft. Mouths slightly parted, eyes half closed, not in detachment, but in presence. You see it in the way Hathor is painted, full-lipped, curving, her body draped in linen that reveals more than it hides. Her hair flows like the Nile at flood. She holds the sistrum, yes, but also the mirror, a symbol not of vanity, but of recognition, to know yourself, to see yourself. That too is holy. And when you see her in the festivals, carried on litters, adorned with flowers, the air itself feels thicker. People don't just pray to her. They sway to her. Music surrounds her, and the body begins to remember. It is not a tool. It is a temple. The temple dancers know this. Their feet are bare. Their eyes lined with kohl. They move not in performance, but in offering. Their hips speak without words. And when they move in circles, when their arms rise like the papyrus stalks, you feel something stir inside you. Not lust, not exactly. Something older, deeper. The echo of life remembering itself. And then there are the priestesses, not veiled, not hidden. Some walk among the people, gathering herbs, tending to the sick, blessing children. But others remain within, in chambers so dark they seem made of ink. They keep secrets, they whisper spells, they anoint visitors, sometimes women, sometimes men, with oil, pressing it into the skin with chants that feel more like humming. One such priestess you hear works with lovers. She listens to their questions. She reads the heat on their skin. She gives them amulets carved not just for protection, but for pleasure. Because to the gods, union is not dirty. It is divine order. It is echo of creation. In one myth, Amun creates the world with his own desire, his seeds spilling into the void and becoming everything. In another, Nut arches over Geb, her brother-lover, their longing so strong it must be separated by Shu, the air itself, to keep the world in balance. Creation begins with bodies, with contact, with aching. You remember the statue of Min, god of fertility, rising tall and unashamed, his phallus carved upright, his hand holding the flail not as a weapon, but as a sign of control. He is not ridiculed, he is worshipped. Offerings are left at his feet, grains, figs, garlands. People pray to him for virility, yes, but also for good harvest, for strength in work, for a family that thrives. Sex is not only for the bed, it is for the field, the temple, the stars. Even in ceremonies for the dead, desire has its place. Some believe that in the afterlife, lovers reunite not only to eat and dance, but to touch, to lie together in golden fields, under skies that never darken. Priests recite spells to ensure that the dead can perform the act of love in eternity, that their member will rise, that their vessel will receive, not because of obsession, because of wholeness. To be complete in the next world means to remember how to desire, and to be desired. You feel it most during the festivals, when the veils between sacred and sensual become thin, when the streets are filled with singing, and women wear their hair loose, and men move with less armor. It is said that in the festival of Hathor, the boundaries loosen, that some return home with more than wine on their lips. You've seen it. Lovers who are not lovers yet, drawn to each other by music and the scent of crushed lotus. A touch on the arm, a dance too close, eyes that do not look away. And no one stops them, not that night. Because when the gods walk among the people, they remember what it is to feel, to crave, to ache and to be soothed. You've asked, is there a line? Is every temple a bed? Of course not. There is reverence. There are boundaries. But the line is not as sharp as some would think. There are priestesses who serve the gods through touch, through closeness, through rituals where the body becomes the prayer. Some say they are sacred prostitutes, others, sacred companions. The name does not matter. The act is not shameful. It is sacred art. Not every temple practices this. Not every person understands, but it exists. And it is honored, because pleasure in its purest form is a return to source, and when done with intention, with ritual, with consent, it is worship. You think of your own body, how it moves, how it hungers, how it heals, and you wonder, what if every moment of closeness could be holy, not just when blessed by oil and chant, but in the quiet, in the ordinary, in the whisper of sheets, in the silence after. You lie in bed and imagine a temple not built from stone, but from touch. From breath, from being seen without flinching. You close your eyes and hear the sistrum shake. And you remember, the gods made your body, not for shame, but for song. There are things that do not reach the scrolls, stories that don't make it into temple carvings or official records, not because they never happened, but because they happened too often, or too quietly, or too darkly. This is the shadowed corner of Egypt's history, the truths whispered behind curtains, carved only in the heart, or passed down in cautious glances. Because alongside the sacredness of love and the beauty of intimacy, there are also edges, sharp ones, and you begin to see them not in myth, but in the silence that follows certain names. You've heard rumors about pharaohs marrying sisters, about children born to both mother and aunt. The word spoken is always tradition. Divine blood must not be diluted. But even as a child you understood, something here is tangled. In the royal houses, where gods and politics twist together, love is not always part of the equation. Incest is not condemned the way it might be in other cultures, at least not among the elite. Among common folk, it's different. You've never met someone married to a sibling. You've heard of cousin marriage, yes. But brothers and sisters? That lives in palaces, behind closed doors. Defended not by affection but by power, the justification is always cosmic. Isis and Osiris were siblings after all. They loved, they made Horus, and their love became legend. But no one tells the other side of that story, the loneliness of being born into a world where only your family is allowed to love you, where the only eyes permitted to desire you are ones that watched you crawl. Still, it exists. You ask an elder once, gently, if it's true. He sighs, long and slow. It kept the blood pure, he says, but not the soul. And you never ask again. There are other shadows too, darker, not bound by law, but by silence. You know of women who have been touched without permission, men too. You hear it in the way they change when certain names are spoken. You see it in the way some flinch when touched, even gently. In a world where sex is sacred, abuse is a kind of blasphemy, but not always punished. Sometimes the abuser is rich, or respected, or simply male. And the victim is inconvenient. You hear of a girl in another village who tried to speak, who told the priest that her master entered her room at night. He told her to pray harder. She stopped coming to temple. You wonder what happened to her. There are amulets for protection, spells to ward off unwanted touch, but they don't always work, and they don't undo what has already been done. Still, people try. They bury sharp stones under their doorsteps. They hang dried herbs on their thresholds. They carve eyes into the backs of chairs, so no one can sneak up behind. Some women carry blades in their waist sashes, not for beauty, for boundaries. You once found a papyrus that told a different kind of spell. If he comes near with harm in his hand, let his feet forget how to walk. Let his breath catch in his throat. Let him see in me the goddess with the lion's teeth. Not for seduction, for defense. You begin to understand that desire, unchecked, becomes danger. That power without balance becomes predation, that some people use the sacred as shield, and others are left to carry the weight. You hear of temples where young boys were taken as servants, and returned quiet, thin, unwilling to speak. You hear of a nobleman who kept 3 companions, none of whom could look you in the eye. And you hear too of people who survived it, who left, who grew, who lit their own incense and spoke their own names again, louder than before. They are not always celebrated, but they are strong, and their stories deserve space. Egypt is not a perfect world. No place is. But even in its shadows, there is clarity. Wrong is wrong. Consent is not a riddle. Love is not possession. Desire without care is not sacred. It is theft. You begin to recognize the signs. The way someone withdraws after laughter. The way their hands tremble at festival. The way they never say no, but never say yes either. And you learn to ask better questions. To wait for the yes that feels like water, not like stone. To step back when the energy shifts. To hold space, not claim it. Because true intimacy cannot be taken, only offered. The gods see this too. Ma'at, the goddess of balance, watches more than stars and grain. She watches how we touch each other and how we don't. In some tombs, you've seen carvings that hint at this. A figure reaching, but stopped by another. A hand not held. An embrace refused. Even the dead want to tell their stories. You think of all the things buried that weren't supposed to be found. Letters never sent, names crossed out, marks on walls scrubbed clean. But some marks linger. Some wounds leave echoes. And some truths, no matter how silent, deserve to be whispered. So you do, at night, when no one is listening. You light a small flame. You say a name, not aloud, but with your heart, and you promise that the shadows will not have the last word. You sit by the river, the Nile breathing beside you as it always does. Slow, wide, ancient. A heron watches from the reeds. The sun begins its descent, painting the water in gold. And for the first time in many evenings, you're not thinking about tomorrow's work, or who might pass you by with a glance too quick or too long. You're thinking about them, the ones who came before, the ones who lived in this land and touched each other under the same moon. And you're thinking, what did they know that we've forgotten? Because the more you learn, the more it seems that the people of ancient Egypt understood something we are still trying to remember. That the body is not the enemy, that the sacred and the sensual are not opposites, that love, when chosen and not demanded, becomes a kind of prayer. You begin to compare, not in judgment, but in curiosity. Today, in your world, desire is often buried under shame or spectacle. Either silenced or shouted so loudly it loses its shape. Intimacy is pixelated. Connection is counted in likes. The body is filtered, feared, commercialized. But in Egypt, the body was known. It was smelled, touched, painted. It was not perfect, but it was whole, a source of pleasure, of power, of presence. You wonder, what would it mean to live like that again? To see yourself not as a collection of flaws, but as a temple. To wake and anoint your skin, not out of insecurity, but devotion. To touch someone not to fill a void, but to share overflow. You think of the love poems etched into stone, of the men who wrote of being breathless at the sight of their beloved's hair, of the women who described their desire with metaphors of water, sun, figs bursting in the heat. No hiding, no disclaimers, just truth, soft, raw. And when love ended, when betrayal came, or loss, they didn't erase it. They wrote that too. She no longer waits for me. The cup is broken. The wine stains the mat, but I still kneel where she once stood. Even heartbreak had its place. Even grief was honored. Today, you are told to move on, to swipe again, to never look back. But the Egyptians built tombs for memory. They believed forgetting was the true death. You wonder what it would be like to love like that now, to let yourself long without apology, to let yourself be known, truly, without armor. Yes, they had rules. Yes, they had silence and power imbalances and danger in the wrong hands, but they also had reverence, ritual, recognition that intimacy is not just an act, but a language, and consent, that modern word, was already there in practice. In the way hands moved slowly, in the way eyes asked questions before bodies answered. You think of your own moments, the times you reached for someone with more fear than hope, the times someone reached for you and you weren't ready. The times you said yes too soon, or no too late. And you wonder, what would the Nile say about that? If it could speak, if it could whisper, as it does now, lapping at the banks, love without fear, touch without taking, leave room for return. You breathe in. You imagine bringing Egypt into your own time, not the clothes or the rituals, but the knowing, the stillness, the slowness. You imagine lighting a candle for your own skin. You imagine offering someone not your body first, but your breath, your attention, your silence, and receiving theirs in return. No performance, no perfection, just presence. Maybe this is what they knew that we forgot, that to be seen, truly, is more powerful than to be wanted, that to be held, gently, is more lasting than to be claimed, and that to lie beside someone in the hush of night, limbs warm and tangled, hearts unguarded, is not the reward of desire. It is desire. You look out over the river. The sun has dipped low now. The heron has flown. And still, the Nile moves, as it always has, carrying stories, carrying names, carrying the memory of hands that once reached, lips that once kissed, bodies that once remembered themselves wholly. And as the stars begin to blink above you, you place your hand on your own chest and whisper to no one and everyone, I am still learning. Night falls fully now. The sky stretches above you, deep indigo, scattered with stars older than any name ever carved into stone. There's a stillness to it. Not the silence of absence, but the silence of completion, the kind that comes after music, after love, after understanding something not with your mind, but with your body. You lie back. The mat beneath you is cool. The air carries hints of jasmine and the faint, sweet smoke of someone's oil lamp flickering out down the street. And as your eyes adjust to the dark, you let go. Not just of today, but of the rush, the analysis, the effort to hold everything in your hands. Because tonight is not for thinking. Tonight is for remembering. You close your eyes, and Egypt comes. Not the Egypt in books, not the Egypt of documentaries or scrolls or syllables etched in stone, but the Egypt of breath, of skin, of touch. Of the love that bloomed where no one expected it, between servants and scribes, dancers and healers, boatmen and bakers. The kind of love that left no records, only fingerprints on clay jars, only footprints beneath beds no longer standing, only sighs carried across the Nile at dusk. You see them now, not as ghosts, but as echoes. A woman smoothing oil into her collarbone before walking toward the festival fire. A man writing a name over and over on the inside of a papyrus scrap. Not for magic, but because the act itself keeps the name alive. Two bodies under linen, whispering dreams into each other's mouths. A midwife sleeping lightly after staying up all night holding the hand of a girl too young, too afraid. A priestess alone in her chamber, offering not a prayer, but a moan, her own pleasure, her own ritual. A child conceived in joy, carried in hope, born into a world that may never explain to them how holy they are. You hear their voices now, not in words, but in rhythm, in the way the wind moves, in the hush that follows the last sentence of a story told well. And their message is simple, soft, unmistakable. You are not alone. You never were. Your hunger is ancient. Your body, flawed, tired, yearning, is sacred. Your longing is not a weakness. It is a doorway, a path back to yourself. And the act of reaching for someone, with care, with clarity, with invitation, is not small. It is cosmic. Because love, in Egypt, was never just between two people. It was between soul and soil, between sky and sigh, between body and balance. You think of the gods again, how they walked with their lovers, how they cried and laughed and mourned, how they bled and healed, how they made the world not through violence but through union. And you realize your every touch carries that lineage. You are not the first to lie awake, wondering if your love is worthy. You are not the first to ache with want. You are not the first to bury someone's name in silence because it hurt too much to speak. And you will not be the last. This, too, is continuity. This, too, is devotion. You shift beneath your linen. The mat creaks gently. Outside, the Nile continues, unbothered by time. And you remember that the Egyptians believed in another kind of night, a night where the soul travelled. Where the heart was weighed, where memories walked alongside you in fields that never dried, where the ones you loved waited, not as phantoms, but as themselves, whole, warm, smiling, their bodies no longer hurting, their hands no longer out of reach, the field of reeds. You've imagined it since you first heard the name, not because you feared death, but because you longed for that return, to peace, to slowness, to enough. You wonder if, when your time comes, you'll find someone there. Not necessarily someone you loved in life. Maybe someone who loved you silently. Maybe someone you never met. Maybe someone who whispered your name into their dreams and waited. And when you arrive, they'll know. They'll say, "You took your time." And you'll say, "I had to learn." And they'll say, "You're here now." And that will be enough. You breathe deeply now. The dark no longer feels heavy. It feels full, like a hand cupped gently over your chest. Like the moment before sleep, when everything loosens. You think of everyone who has ever ached like you, who has ever searched someone's eyes for home, who has ever touched someone's cheek and thought, "Stay." You think of the stories you've been told, and the ones you'll never know, of women who loved fiercely and quietly, of men who wrote poems and never read them aloud, of lovers who met only once, yet remembered each other for lifetimes. Of bodies who gave, not to prove anything, but because giving felt like truth. You think of all the nights the Nile carried the sound of two people breathing in rhythm, and now you're one of them. Tonight, there is no lesson, no question, no answer. Only this: you are part of something very old, very tender, very true. Your story may never be written, but it will be felt, and that is enough. So rest now. Let the past hold you. Let your breath slow. Let your skin remember that it was never meant to be perfect, only present. The story is told. The night is deep. And the love, yours, theirs, all of it, is still moving, still glowing, like a star reflected on the surface of the Nile. Sleep now. You are home.